Hey everybody, this is Brian for Breaking Down Security. This week, before we get started, a couple things. The guest that we had this week had the wherewithal to record her audio when she was in a hotel. The hotel Wi-Fi was not kind to her, so we have a couple of spots where you can tell that we're using her audio versus our audio, and we appreciate her for doing that. The other thing is a little disclaimer. The thoughts, theories, opinions, suggestions that Mr. Betcher, Ms. Berlin, and I give out on our podcast are not thoughts, opinions, suggestions, advice of our respective companies, past, present, or future. All right, on with the show. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. It's Brian, Ms. Berlin, and Mr. Betcher for Breaking Down Security.
Hey.
Hello.
All right, everybody's here. I thought you were going to dial in this week, Mr. Betcher. What happened? Did something change?
What do you mean, dial in?
Well, I thought you said you were just going to call in and instead of, being here. Or is that going to be next week?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Well, I'm glad I'm the only one because that means
you're getting old, man.
Oh God, don't. I'm sitting at work. I've been on site with a customer the last couple of weeks, and I'm talking to these 20, 22, 23, 24-year-old kids for all intents and purposes. And I've got more experience than 5 of the entire team of folks there. It's like everybody else on the team, they're like, oh yeah, we're sitting here talking about pen tests. I'm like, yeah, that's not a good pen test. And they're like, well, why not? I'm like, because they're just running Nmap and calling it a pen test. There's so many. I've seen so many crap pen tests from so many companies. The pen test puppy mill is alive and well in these days.
It's rampant.
Oh my God. And it's like when you write back and you're like, did you actually do any manual testing? Oh yeah, we ran Scarab or we ran Spider Oak or whatever. And I'm like, no, that's
SQL Map.
Yeah, we ran SQL Map. And I'm like, no, that's not what I'm talking about. And I was like, did you even at least run burp or try to fuzz some inputs or something? And they're like, oh, yeah. And I was like, okay, yeah.
Heard about that.
Yeah. Reading some of these pen tests, and not just because of where we work. I work at, you really get a sense of what a quality pen test is versus like others. So, there's and companies I've never even heard of are doing pen tests. And I'm like, who's Bob's, big boy, pen test firm? And I was like, he's not very big because I've never heard of him. He lives in Fort Worth, Indiana. Well, great. That's fantastic. I have no clue where the hell that is. So,
I know where Fort Worth is.
That's not Texas. I have no idea where this was.
There's company. Fort Wayne.
Okay. Could be Fort Wayne. The other fort. Yeah,
right.
With a W.
Right.
All right. I don't think they were in Fort Wayne, but yeah, it was just reading some of these. And then you've got to write back to people and tell them their baby is ugly and they need a better pen test. And we spent $50,000 on this. I'm like, you got screwed. Okay. It's just one of those things. And maybe we can educate.
Kind of the same thing from detection because we can see how loud so many attackers are.
Yeah.
Not even attackers, just loud pen tests.
So one day you'll wake up and it'll be like all of a sudden you'd be hitting, warnings and stuff and you're like, oh, okay, what's going on? Do you ever eat? How long does it take for a company to get back to you? Oh, we're doing pen tests. We forgot to tell you, sorry.
A lot of times they don't want to tell us until it's over.
Ah, bastards. Okay.
Which is fine because we can tell really quick.
Well, that's good. That's good. I mean, I've seen engagements where they had no clue, and then all of a sudden they blocked their IP.
This account that they're using to brute force is just called audit.
Oh, yes. Pen tester user at
like,
whatever.
Oh, you can see the workstation name in the Windows logs, and it says Nmap.
right. Or it says something -Kali or whatever.
Right.
Like, oh, okay. Yeah, I know what that is. Cool. All right. So, Miss Berlin, quickly before we get started, you're going to be at SHMU in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, next week.
Very nice. Okay.
Yeah, very excited.
And you were just on a podcast recently, weren't you? Not this
I
one. some
I
other one.
was. I was on the MISec podcast.
And how was that?
Very good. The guys did an awesome job. They just started it up not too long ago.
Fantastic.
And they did really good. The conversation went really well, and yeah, that's very nice.
Do you have a link to that so we can put it in the show notes?
I sure can.
Pimp it out, so they can get some
I think
listeners.
they'll be nervous that we're going to put it in our show notes.
Oh, well, it's all right. I don't mind.
They weren't even sure they wanted me to tweet it. So
why is that?
Just early on jitters, I think.
Oh, well, we'll give them a little. I wouldn't call it a bump, but we'll shine a light on them like Sauron did to Frodo or whatever.
The beacons have been lit.
That's right. Gondor is frayed. So, cool. Yeah, if you could put that in the show notes, that'd be great. We've had enough witty banter. I think we need to bring our guest in this week. A little background. Never met Liz in Meet Space. I followed her on Twitter for a long time now. I saw her tweet out something about a blog post talking about an incident response at her company, and I'm like, really? Companies don't normally post things about incident responses that happen at their orgs on purpose.
No, that's way too much information.
Yeah. Usually it's post Krebs. We care about your data, and we absolutely
security is very important to us.
Security is very important to us. No customer data has been leaked at this time until we talk about it the next time. And
Thank you. Goodbye.
That we know of.
Then you completely owned. Yeah. So I was really impressed about the write-up and what had happened. And I reached out to Liz and I said, hey, we'd love for you to come on the show. And she was awesome enough to get in touch with me. And I'm sure she was like, who the hell is this guy? And why does he want me on the show? Which is typical, but it's okay. I'm used to that. But thank you, Liz, for joining us for the on the show.
Thank you for having me on the show.
Cool.
My beat is not normally security. I just happen to have a passing interest in it. So it's always great to facilitate those crossovers between the reliability and security communities.
Right on. And you do a podcast of your own, right?
Yes, it's called OllyCast, where Ollie is short for observability, the art of being able to understand what your systems are actually doing under the hood.
Okay. Could we get that? Could we get a link to that or something in the show notes?
Sure, absolutely. It's one of the Heavy Bit podcasts. So if you go to heavybit.com and you'll look for OllyCast, you'll find it.
Okay. Heavy Bit. Oh, okay. Very cool. All right. Yeah, we'll definitely add that to the show notes. So Can you tell us a little? So I looked up honeycomb.io and I saw your about page and was reading through some of it, and maybe you could shine a light a little bit to help me understand what honeycomb.io does for a customer's environment.
Sure. So Honeycomb is a service that provides analytics for instrumentation that you install into your program. So we help you get distributed traces. We help you do breakdowns and really analyze what's happening inside of my system, even potentially on a per customer, per IP address, per path basis, kind of letting people get more detailed analytics than they'd be able to get any other way. So it's kind of a combination between a metrics product, a logging product, a tracing product, kind of all rolled into one with the goal that you don't have to spend time tearing out your hair trying to figure out why is there a bug in my software, who's breaking into my systems. So it's kind of a Swiss Army knife for being able to understand your production environment in full resolution.
Okay. And Honeycomb works, it says here, it's for platforms, microservices, serverless apps, and complex systems. Is this for let's say I want to run, all the Dockers and all of the containers, and is it for, making sure that those are running at peak optimum efficiency, or is it something else?
It's slightly more complicated than that, in that we don't necessarily monitor things on a per container basis. Instead, we help you understand what your code is doing regardless of where it's running. So we, have everyone from people who are running service functions all over the place to people who literally have one monolith that they're at wit's end trying to debug and figure out what's going wrong, right? Like the common denominator is people who are trying to and failing to understand what's happening inside of production. We give them that visibility.
Oh, cool.
And, in the course of that, yes, if you have a distributed system with containers, with microservices, we can help you trace requests through the execution across all of your services. But it's also kind of very, very useful in general to be able to understand what are individual users doing, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, okay. So you mentioned serverless apps. Would that be like if you're running Heroku or something like that? You can use...
Yeah, Heroku, AWS Lambda, GCP Cloud Functions, kind of all of those various things where you're not necessarily guaranteed a permanent environment that you can SSH into and inspect, right?
Sure.
You got to have other ways of being able to get the telemetry and data out of them to understand what happened after the fact.
Okay, very cool. All right.
So kind of the parallel to your world is, right, if you're doing instant analysis, forensics, right, like you got to have the data. If you don't have the data, you can't analyze it. If you can't analyze it, you can't figure out what went wrong.
Right. Okay. And so for those of you listening, they're not a sponsor. We don't do sponsored talks. Just trying to get some background on this. Honeycomb is agentless, I would imagine. How does it actually monitor these environments? It's agentless, or is there something that is pulling telemetry in terms of logs, or what are we looking at?
We actually ask you to push telemetry to us. So we ask you to install like 1 or 2 lines of code, and then, anytime you might feel tempted to log something, instead you just put in a call that inserts a key value pair. And then at the end of the request, that gets shipped off to us. You can also run it in agentless type modes. You can also run it in log scraping modes, but the best usage is really just let us hook your HTTP handlers and we'll provide all of the reporting on who's calling you, what are they doing, etc.
Okay, so you're doing it over an API kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. There's a API. You could literally choose to throw JSON at us if you want to, but we have a friendlier API for most languages.
Right on. Okay. All right. So, I was, let's see, this was probably December when I saw this. I don't know if when you actually posted this to LinkedIn, not LinkedIn, but Twitter, but the incident was in November that it happened. I remember that because I was traveling in Berlin. The rest of the team was home in San Francisco. And we had a little bit of an outage. And as I was saying earlier, people send us their telemetry. People expect us to process their telemetry. And we were dropping a little bit of that telemetry on the floor, and it was midnight Pacific time. It was like 8 a.m., 9 a.m. in Berlin. I was like, we got to do something. Right. So it says you were rejecting 1 to 3% of customer telemetry data. So you must have some telemetry, like I mentioned in the show notes, meta telemetry. Is there some kind of telemetry that lets you know that telemetry data is not being done?
Yes, the common term for that is called meta monitoring. So we actually run 3 different copies of Honeycomb. So we have the production copy of Honeycomb that receives our customer's telemetry. That copy of Honeycomb sends its telemetry to a copy of Honeycomb called dog food. And then dog food similarly sends its telemetry to Kibble. And Kibble isn't really instrumented in any way. So it's kind of this layer of turtles all the way down where we try to keep tabs on debugging Honeycomb using Honeycomb itself. So our instrumentation, our dog food instrumentation that was looking at production noticed.
Okay. Can you break down how you detect a lack of data? Like, you can't be expecting, for example, every 5 seconds, you're going to get some data from this one customer. I mean, there may not be any data to send. How does that work?
Yeah, that's a lovely subject. So it turns out that is simultaneously one of the reasons why the incident took so long to detect was that indeed you cannot easily detect an absence of data. So one of the signals we were getting was our Amazon load balancer logs. Our Amazon load balancer logs were saying, hey, we're rejecting these requests. We cannot find any available backends to serve, right? That we're seeing HTTP 500s go out. And we knew that we wanted to be serving, at least 4 nines of availability. So when we started rejecting 1% of traffic, 2% of traffic, we knew we were going to be in trouble based off of that alone. But at the same time, indeed, as you're pointing out, we didn't see any obvious signs of something wrong in our application logic itself. It was as if the request had never gotten to the back end.
Okay. Nice.
I can definitely confirm detecting lack of data is super difficult.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, for Amanda, you're doing it the more traditional route, right? Where everybody's just pushing the logs to y'all and you're analyzing them.
Correct. Yeah, and it's still not easy to alert when you either have a significant loss in data. So say there's even still a little bit coming through.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that was a lot of the challenge, right? Like,
right.
We were getting 99% of the data we were expecting to see, right? There is not an obvious giant blip of you're missing all of your data. That would have been much easier to debug.
Right.
So I don't know how deep you want to get under the hill here, but you say that you actually earlier you mentioned you've got a little line of code where people are actually pushing things to you. When the load balancer said there was no place to route that to, are you routing that to some kind of super large NoSQL database? Are you using some kind of typical database, or how are you storing those logs? And is it a fact that's, you mentioned later on we'll talk about the confirmation bias, but where didn't those logs end up at?
Those key value pairs, you mean?
Normally those key value JSON blobs that get sent to us, they normally go through the Amazon load balancer, and then they end up at a ingest worker, right? We have to verify, is this API key authorized? Are they within quota? And after it's done with that, it's supposed to go into Kafka. However, what was happening was that the workers that were supposed to be sending it to Kafka, right, from Amazon's perspective, they weren't there. So Amazon rejected the traffic and put a nice error message in the log saying we rejected some traffic. And past that, yes, there's a column store that we wrote ourselves that winds up reading stuff off of Kafka and indexing it. But that kind of is not as relevant to this part of the story because we were even rejecting it before it got to Kafka.
Yeah. So you said you're missing 1 to 3% of the data. So some of the data was actually getting routed where it needed to go. Other data was not. Is that just a partial failure, or was there a complete failure and it just hadn't been logged yet?
It was a partial failure, but it took us a while to figure out why. We thought at first that everything looked normal from the perspective of our telemetry measuring our production environment. So we thought, okay, this must be an AWS networking issue. Maybe AWS's load balancers are having trouble talking to our ingest workers. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of the first direction we started investigating, was trying to figure out, okay, partial failure, maybe this is a networking blip.
Okay. So in the blog post, you have a graphic of some outputs. Looks like a typical dashboard where you're seeing, request URIs and such like that. Is this part of your operational dashboard, or do you have where did these dashboards or these pretty graphs come from?
We advocate a interesting strategy to looking at graphs, which is we don't keep a Death Star, of graphs projected above everyone's desks, right? Okay. So the thing that we do is we receive alerting based off of the percentage of requests that are successfully completing. So if we detect that we're going to fall short of our availability target, then the person on call gets emailed via PagerDuty a link to this dashboard, right, that says, here's our target, here's how we're currently doing, and it's looking bad. And here are some of the common factors, right? Here is what might start you debugging this incident.
Right.
So it's a very different take than most people who are staring at dashboards, that it's a fixed set of dashboards, in that, yes, there is kind of the constant of how much traffic are we getting, how many errors, but kind of the bit below that is something that is always changing, right? There are always varying things that are in common or not in common between your errors. So we kind of instead encourage people to dive in and search the data and compose new queries rather than just looking at the same dashboards over and over.
Mm-hmm. So
what you're looking at is kind of the start to the exploration process.
Oh, very cool. Okay. I'm going for those of y'all that are listening, I'm going through my PMP certification right now. And some of the things that came up was how you identify trends when you're looking at data points and stuff. And I was wondering if it was along that similar lines where you were maybe seeing a constant decrease in the amount of data. And the way they consider a trend is like 5 to 7, or actually it's 7. seven data points in any one direction. So if it goes down 7 times on the graph, then that's considered a trend, or that's a what do they call it? That's an event. It wasn't an incident. It's an event.
Yeah, it's slightly more and less complicated than that. We're just looking in general at the total percentage of successful events divided by the total number of events. And that's over a 30-day period that we're looking over. So this isn't necessarily looking for a number of points that are above or below a line like continuously. Instead, this is looking at the overall success rate over 30 days.
Okay.
And as you can imagine, when you start rejecting 1% of traffic for 30 minutes, 40 minutes, that starts really impacting your 30-day availability if you're targeting something like 99.99%.
Right. Okay. So you started out with the good, the bad, and the ugly. Y'all found so SLOs, service level objectives, are those similar to how SLAs, service level agreements are, where you're trying to set your
it's very, very similar. The service level objective is something that's an internal reporting metric. It says, this is what we're targeting as far as the level of service we want to provide. Mm-hmm. You never, ever, ever want your SLO to be looser than your SLA, right? Then you're going to repeatedly wind up paying money back to customers.
Right.
So instead, we try to set our SLOs more aggressive than our SLAs, so that way we catch things before our customers do. The goal is kind of to maintain an acceptable level of service for most customers.
Okay. Excellent. Okay.
Better than expected.
Right. So it says, then we got ourselves into trouble, and it says, where did we get lucky or unlucky? And you said, well, I don't know if you specifically wrote this, but it said, unclear incident handling contributed to the confusion. Maybe you could go into a little of that. I know you said you were in Berlin and it was 9 o'clock.
Yeah, exactly. I was in Berlin. It was 9 a.m. when the alert first went off. And unfortunately, this was a feature we were beta testing that had caught this incident. Oh. So we weren't 100% confident in it yet, such that it would wake up someone who was on call. Mm-hmm. So I wound up being the person who happened to spot it because it didn't go to the on-call. And I stared at it for a while, decided, I think this might be a signal. I think we should look at it. And I woke up the person on call, and it was 2 or 3 a.m. for them. And that person said, you know what, let's see whether it comes back again, because it had cleared up on its own. So so I woke up the on-call, and the on-call and I talked about it. We said, let's see whether it happens again. The on-call went back to bed, and then it happened again, and I woke up the on-call again. But I the on-call never really took ownership of the issue. When our incident handling procedures say the on-call is empowered to take control of the issue, and I think that kind of tension was something that resulted in neither of us really driving this to resolution. And then finally, it was hours later, and people started waking up in Pacific time zone, and finally we got some fresh eyes on it. Finally, we started the proper incident handling procedures. But we should have been a lot more aggressive about saying, you know what, production is impacted. We're declaring an incident. This person is the incident commander. Let's go ahead and move forward, right? It's kind of that clarity really, really matters when things are on fire. Mm-hmm.
So what you said was at one point you were trying to find out from Amazon if it was in their house, if it was a problem with AWS, and you had reached out publicly on Twitter to see if other AWS customers were having issues. Why was that an error in your case? Was it being too public, or being how big a problem was that?
The problem was not that we talked about the issue publicly. The problem was that we misinterpreted the data that we got back. As you can imagine, Amazon is a very large environment, and any customer of Amazon's is likely to be having trouble at any moment in time. So when we said, hey, we think we're seeing something with Amazon, is anyone else seeing something? It meant only the people that happen to be also seeing an issue at the same time for unrelated reasons happened to write back. And the people for whom everything is working fine didn't write back. So what we saw was a bunch of people saying, yes, there's a problem with Amazon. So then we assumed there was nothing we could do aside from wait it out. So that delayed our resolution of the issue, because it turns out there was something we could have done that was on our side. Because it turns out, I don't know how much we want to spoil the ending, but it turns out that it was in fact our servers that were crashing, and that's why Amazon couldn't talk to them. But it took us hours to figure it out.
Right. And none of your customers actually knew that there was a problem. They just there's a bit of a hole in their logs is what they're going to see now?
Exactly. We aim to achieve a fairly high level of reliability. In this particular case, more customers found out from us being transparent about the issue than wrote in themselves, but definitely someone would eventually have noticed, because when you're missing 1% of your data, that does eventually turn up.
Right. It
certainly is, better than losing 100% of your data, right? If you have 100% data outage, you write in right away, right?
Right. So you mentioned a memory leak. I don't know how much you want to give. A lot of times I hear memory leak and I'm thinking that it's a bunch of Java code on the back end. Was this introduced because of a new feature, or is this just part of the underlying language being used there for Honeycomb's technology?
Yeah, this was super interesting in that we were trying to save CPU cycles. We were trying to more efficient compression algorithm. So we installed a new compression library into our binaries, linked it in, we wired it all up, and then it had that was slowly, basically what was going on was we introduced something that was meant to save us money, that was not meant to be a new feature necessarily, but was meant to improve the service, and instead we impaired the performance of the service.
Okay. But I'm sure it took a little bit for it to show up.
Yeah, that was the problem, right? And in fact, that's why it didn't go off until like 2 or 3 a.m. Pacific time, right? Because if you can imagine, if we are pushing out this change, it goes out in the morning, and then we're pushing other changes which force process restarts during the day, the memory leak doesn't actually cause things to start crashing over and over and over again until it's nighttime when things have been running for a while.
Right.
Yeah. So what was your methodology that your company followed to diagnose the issue, recognize the issue, plan, do, check, act kind of stuff? Whereas what was the war room like? Was it very contentious? Was it, collaborative? What was the feeling like when y'all were doing this IR?
We're a very collaborative company. We do everything over Slack primarily, so there's no physical war rooms. Instead, we tend to meet on Slack channels when there's an incident going on. Mm-hmm. So the on-call and I had some say in what had happened overnight, but when people started getting in the morning and we're all saying hey, there's a problem, we don't know what's going on, one of the people who was fresh basically said, what, let's recheck some assumptions. I'm going to go verify what I think is going on. Hey, wait a second. Why is the number of process uptime seconds so low? And then it hit us, right? Then it hit us that instead of the problem being networking, we were literally preparing to restart all of our Amazon load balancers, to tear them down and bring them back up again. This person saved us from having to do that because he just asked that simple question of, walk me through what you did, right? And then he verified and said, you know what, this doesn't make sense to me. This doesn't make sense at all, right? And I think that is a really positive element of our culture, such that someone can come in with a different hypothesis, a different set of facts to back it. And we welcome having that data rather than saying, oh my God, you made us waste so much time, or, oh my goodness, we want to just carry through doing this restart first, right? We were open to hearing that person's insights, and that reduced the amount of time that it took us to understand what was going on.
Okay. Very nice. Let me see.
Now, had you not been able to detect this at 1%, let's say maybe 25%, would this have cascaded? Would it have grown exponentially?
No, there is no risk of that. And in fact, it actually, had it continued longer, the simultaneous restarts would have spread themselves out, right? If you can imagine, if you do a deployment, right, you restart all of your processes within 5 or 10 minutes, right? And then they start memory leaking. You can imagine that over the course of several hours, eventually one of them tips over, the other one tips over, they all restart, and then Amazon can't find any available running ones to talk to, right? But if you repeat that 2 or 3 or 4 more times, eventually those restarts are spaced over the course of half an hour rather than all restarting in a 5 or 10 minute window. So I think what would have happened is it would have become, in a lot of ways, harder to debug over time rather than easier, in that we kind of had that signal of, hey, wait a second, something is definitively wrong.
Very cool. All right.
I see. They would have overlapped and in essence, kind of covered their tracks, basically.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's part of the challenge of telemetry, right? Is if you are depending upon a process to finish executing a request and then send the telemetry, then you're going to be missing the telemetry if it crashes suddenly, right? And we do have really, really good crash instrumentation for, like, if there's a nil pointer dereference or some other kind of software bug. But if something gets killed due to being out of memory, that was something that we were not doing as good of a job of saying, hey, wait a second, this shouldn't be happening here.
Okay. So once you diagnosed the issue, how quickly was a fix able to be pushed out?
The fix was literally less than an hour. There are two ways we could have mitigated it. I don't remember which one we did. Number one, we had a good build that we knew was working. Number two, we also knew that the memory leak, when you looked at it, it was obvious where the memory leak had come in, even though it hadn't crashed anything. You could see which commit had introduced the memory increase over time, even though other people's commits had rolled out over the day before. So we just reverted that commit, patched it in, and we were good to go within less than an hour.
Okay, very nice. So forgive me, I don't work in an overly agile environment. I work at a security consultancy. So you pushed out the fix. There was, I'm assuming, a lessons learned after, and some documentation was updated. Was any monitoring updated, or any kind of rules or logs or anything updated so that you might catch something like this in the future?
The main thing that we wound up deciding to do there was actually just updating our process restart related stuff. We trying to think about how to say this. The same outage is never going to happen over and over and over again, right? We don't look at the same dashboards over and over. So it kind of is a matter of just retraining ourselves to consider that as a potential hypothesis, if that makes sense. There's kind of not necessarily a giant single thing that you can do to ward off running into a cognitive blind spot, right? I think that a future cognitive blind spot might catch you equally off guard.
All right, and that was part one of our interview with Liz Fong-Jones, speaking with us about the incident response at Honeycomb.io and how they remediated it, and we got a little bit of inner workings of how Honeycomb works. So they're not a sponsor, but if you're interested in whatever services that Honeycomb.io does, maybe you could go check them out. We don't endorse them in any way, but it sounds like they're doing a lot of good things there, especially using their own tooling to try to get better and be more responsive to incident responses. You can find Liz on Twitter at Liz the Grey. That's Grey, like the United Kingdom version of Grey, not the U.S. version. As to the rest of the people on the show, the Twitters for Ms. Berlin, you can find her at InfoSister and Hackers Health. That's her nonprofit she uses to spread awareness of mental health issues in the InfoSec community. Mr. Betcher, you can find him on Twitter at BetcherPwned. Also, he's the lone developer for LogMD, which is a Windows forensic and logging tool. So if you're interested in checking that out or trying to get better logs from your Windows boxes, hit up log_MD on Twitter and find that. You can join our Slack. We have a very active Slack community. It's moderated. We have a social contract. We expect everybody to act as professionals and be adults on there. So if you're interested in joining that Slack, you can hit us up on Twitter, send us a DM to Brakesec, Brakesec, or you can just email us at bds.podcast@gmail.com. Finally, you can just follow me on Twitter at Brian Brake. That's with a Y, and my last name is Brake. Thank you to all of our patrons for their generous donations each month that goes to paying for the Zoom that we use, hosting fees on Libsyn, domain registration, which is a couple $100 a year, as a matter of fact. Also, other things that we do, like we buy stickers and swag that we give out to our customers. If you're interested in buying some swag, we also have a TPub store. You can go to brakesec.com/store and you can grab a t-shirt, coffee mug, stickers there. TPub actually does a very very decent job with t-shirts, and if you're interested in some of our swag, you can grab that too. And I think we get a little kickback from that. So if you don't want to support us on Patreon or what have you, grab a t-shirt or some stickers, and we get a little, couple of bucks or something, which is great. We're also on Amazon Smile, our nonprofit, the InfoSec Education Foundation, which is the umbrella group that we use for the podcast and for our local CSEC East meetup here in Seattle, as well as the conference for InfoSec Campout, is all under that nonprofit. If you go to Amazon, smile.amazon.com, you can select a charity. You can select InfoSec Education Foundation. Or if you don't want to support InfoSec Education Foundation, there's a whole number of other worthwhile charities there if you want to do that. And what happens is you buy something that's eligible for Amazon Smile. Amazon sends a little money to that nonprofit. We get a little kickback if you don't want to support us on Patreon on a regular basis or anything like that, and that's fine. Podcast and everything will always be free. So if you're interested in doing that, you can go look for InfoSec Education Foundation on Amazon and do it that way. All right. Well, Liz will be back next week to discuss some additional items, including a very interesting discussion about what a developer advocate is. So, amongst other things. So please come back and join us again. And that was it for Breaking Down Security this week. Have a great week. Be nice to one another. Take care of yourself because you're the only you have. And we'll talk to you again soon.